Well, howdy YouTube. Today we are watching only Wi-Fi's video, The Rise of Elden Ring Kevins. And yeah, let's watch it.
If your gray matter is rotten enough to watch this channel on the regular, you may have noticed that we sometimes refer to this type of specimen right here as Kevin. Many of you may be confused by the strange naming of these individuals with W skills and Radan armor, so I believe a video about them has been long overdue. And you'll be surprised to know that their categorization is much more than just a funny nickname. It's actually the noticing of a phenomenon that has been affecting the Souls genre for quite a while. But first, what is a Kevin? To keep it simple, Kevin is the type of player to put the bare minimum effort in order to beat the game. They do not learn, they look up builds and guides online before they even start their playthrough, and they choose to get carried by their friends or random players whenever possible. Be it because the game is too much for them, because they wanna be done with it as fast as possible, or a combination of both. Whatever the fuck is their issue. And what I believe to be the most defining feature of Kevin's is the fact that they will complain. They will complain about everything. They will complain about the game, they will complain about PvP, they will complain about invaders, complain. That's the worst part.
Honestly, that sounds like the average PvPer. So, PvPers are like Kevins. Ah, okay.
I believe. Because bad players, there are plenty. But people who complain instead of, getting better, I don't like those. It's the antithesis of what a Souls player should stand for, overcoming the game's challenges by sheer resilience and resolve. We sometimes jokingly call players we run into Kevins because they just fit the profile, they just look like them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they fit into all of these characteristics we just described. They just look goofy. They use the common PvE stuff such as Radan armor, Rivers of Blood, Bloodhound's Fang, Blasphemous Blade, Lion's Claw.
I just want to point out, I have a competition in air rollings at this point, and I'm not sure if I like it.
Etc., etc. We just call them like that as a joke, but we don't mean that they are, actual Kevins. Now the question that
Actually, so I'm gonna stop here for a second. The point that Waifu makes is as if Kevins are overall people that just complain a lot, yeah? In the stupid way, from the scrap perspective. So, for example, people that just going to tell you that, oh, why you have to try hard so much? Why you cannot have fun? Yeah, this type of literally ridiculous statements. But he comes from that perspective of it's wrong because Souls games initially stands for getting better, improving. I gotta have to listen more to what's his point of the video. Kevin in my eyes is just the guy with the fucking Radan's armor and that's it. Here Waifu just made the entire weird categorization that just would fit more of a term of an idiot rather than Kevin.
But we don't mean that they are, actual Kevins. Now the question that may arise here is if there's something inherently wrong with Kevins existing. To which I say, no, not at all. Why would there be a problem? I just think that it's a pretty interesting topic since the dawn of Kevins has been tremendous in the last few years with the release of Elden Ring. Like I mentioned, the existence of these players is extremely ironic considering the type of game we are talking about, a type of game that one would think attracts a different kind of gamer, but
no, that's a wrong assumption. Elden Ring is super casualized version of Souls game. It's, of course, From Software got much better at boss designing and moveset designing and so on, yeah? Elden Ring is the most polished game of their studio in many aspects, they fucked up this or that, but overall it's the most polished game. That being said, as fundamental idea of what Elden Ring is supposed to be, it was mentioned everywhere at the release of Elden Ring that it's supposed to be just not Dark Souls, yeah? It's more accessible experience to what we usually know as From Software's games. You cannot put it in the same category in my opinion.
being so goddamn massive, it's normal that Elden Ring attracted many different kinds of people to the lands between, and not just the average John Dark Souls. And speaking of John Dark Souls, since I know there's some of them among my little puggies, I made a poll to ask you guys what you think Kedens are. So let's take a look at some of your comments. Full Radan armor. Only presses L2 and mains any of the following weapons. Bloodhound's Fang, bonus points if they have Bloodflame Blade 2. Rivers of Blood, Gunbale. And Blasphemous Blade. I would say it's a pretty fair assessment, and
Honestly, this is how I would describe Kevin meme. Frankly, this is exactly what I consider as a Kevin.
yeah, most of the Kevins are just like that, you know, full Radan and some of these PvE-friendly weapons that you see all the time. I feel like the term is actually different depending on who you ask. I've seen people use it to insult and others to joke around. To me, a Kevin is a low-skill player fashioning the Radan's armor. Having a readers in hand helps the look as well. Alright, so we are starting to see a pattern here. It seems that the definition of Kevins of many people seem to be quite fashion-oriented. So let's see what else there is.
I wouldn't say it's fashion-oriented. It's just like rather none of these tools that are here described, yeah, are particularly like the tools that like the best players would choose, yeah, or differently, like tools that experienced players would actually choose, yeah. It's more like just like Radan armor is just somewhat good of the armor that is easily accessible. The Bloodhound's Fang is pretty good too, like not the best by any means, but you can cheese like bosses with the insane amount of the posture damage that you deal with the Ash of War. It gives you iframes, so like it is relatively easy tool to use. Rivers of Blood staggers like freaking crazy. Gunveil, same story, and Blasphemous Blade is actually healing you up on hitting an opponent. On top of that, it also deals a lot of the stagger damage. So yeah, those are just like tools that makes your playthrough much easier. And Radan set is a simply good armor set that is not by any means great, but easily accessible, yeah?
I watched this video today and I commented under it.
And what you commented?
That I was a Kevin, and I agree with what John says later.
Okay.
I would say this is the best one I've seen in the poll. Definition of a Kevin to me is as follows. Buys the game because it's popular, gets wrecked, whines about it, gets OP weapon and cheeses bosses, complains about the game being too easy, or too hard, may I add, and beats the game once and brags about it.
I don't know if I like it. Like, Kevin used to be rather like wholesome term, and like if we are going to consider like the definition of the Kevin by these terms that we see here in the comments, I think this is just pretty dog shit. Like my girlfriend like said that she used to be a Kevin, yeah, for one. But as far as I am aware, and I never seen her like get fucking wrecked and then whine about it. Rather, like, she always tried to overcome the challenges, yeah? She beat the game for the first time with the Wink of Astel, which is absolutely not, like, OP weapon that cheeses bosses. And she didn't buy the game because it's popular. She got it as a present on her birthday. Complaints about the game being too easy. That one doesn't make sense at all in my eyes, and beats the game once and brags about it. I don't know, it's very far-fetched, and nah, I really dislike this definition. I think it is like a definition kept in the tone of the bad faith, and I don't like it.
I added 2 points because, of course I had, complains that his L2 spamming doesn't work in PvP, and cries about invasions on Reddit. I think the important thing to highlight about this comment is that Kevins are no longer attributed only a distinctive physical trait, but also a behavioral one. And I believe this further deepens the term beyond just saying Radan armor equals Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is kind of how I was always looking at it, yeah? Like, the Radan armor was the key aspect of a Kevin. I don't know why we would actually have a need to expand pretty like a harmless and just like a cute way of describing a scrub or typical scrub into something that is just like basically a description of an idiot.
Kevins are basically tourists. I like them. It's entertaining to invade and follow them in secret, observing how they engage with the game. They're almost cute in a way. The plot, like my gravy, thickens, because now we have a new definition. They are tourists, which fits with what I said about the game being massive and attracting a new kind of player. Full Radan armor, never touched PvP. That's a good point. Kevins don't usually like to engage with PvP.
Overall, vast majority of the player base dislikes to engage in PvP in this type of games. Funnily enough, it is even the case when it comes to fighting games. You have these games, like for example, like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, yeah? And this game had like very good start for like typical fighting games, let's call it, yeah? After people are done with the main story, despite it being technically a fighting game, yeah? So essentially a game that you would expect would be popular in the PvP. No, people just dip. They played through like the main story. Like PvP overall by design, or more like by default, is usually not as popular as like single player campaigns. And it's like actually a common thing, frankly. Even in genres that are more familiar with multiplayer interactions or straight up PvP. I'm saying it because I have seen a lot of people in the past like saying stuff along the line that no one cares about PvP, and that's why From Software supposed to, for example, ditch the PvP altogether, which is kind of fucking ridiculous statement. Like when developer implements that PvP into the game, it's rather understandable it's going to be a niche thing. Like it's actually only to be expected. Like the single player experience gonna be the most popular, then co-op going to be the second, and then like eventually PvP.
But it does happen sometimes. As you can see, players that avoid critical thought, fighting at you rather than against you, they will button mash thinking you want dodge, dodge thinking you want roll catch them, as if you are just another part of the PvE. This is a really important thing to take into account because Kevins do not differentiate PvE from PvP. They will just do whatever they are used to do and they won't give a single fuck about it.
It's kind of understandable though. Like, the PvP and PvE differ so incredibly much in the gameplay execution. And people just don't know that. They cannot know that because there is no active PvP play when you are playing through the game. Like, you are not going to fight other players as often as you play against bosses or like regular mobs. Also worth to mention, even like PvE NPCs that supposed to mimic the players are doing pretty bad job at doing so. Like they are usually just rushing you brain deadly and not doing anything that you would typically do in PvP.
Kevin option is definitely the most appropriate for a player who cheeses the game. Low-skill players have a different nickname. We call them noobs. This one is interesting because it makes a big differentiation. It's not the same being a Kevin as being a noob. Noobs eventually improve. Kevins do not. Alright, I can see some of you poggies have been doing your homework. We got a pretty good grasp of what Kevins are. But knowing just what they are is not really going to cut it for this video, will it? We need to have more insight into their mentality and behavior. So in order to help us with that, I summoned... Get it? What I think is the real John Dark Souls of Elden Ring PvP and player behavior, Emotional John.
Thanks for having me, waifu. I'm Emotional John, and I run a YouTube channel focused on Souls PvP analysis where I dive into the more conceptual nature of invasions and how players should engage with both PvP and Souls games broadly.
Very good channel, by the way. If you like yapping, Emotional John is fucking goated.
I tend to do a lot of critical analysis of Elden Ring and try to critique it with as much nuance and perspective as I can. Most of my content is geared toward players familiar with the Souls series and invasions, but I'm constantly addressing players who want nothing to do with them, who have had bad experiences or just don't like it, or have no real grasp on the system in general, so hopefully I have some useful insights into how an average Kevin interacts with the game.
Thanks for being here, John. Gotta say that I really admire your dedication to the topic. So, for the first question, what would you say is the driving mentality behind Kevins in Elden Ring?
I've encountered my share of Kevins over the years, and if I had to pick a rationale, I'd probably say it's some combination of frustration and unrealistic expectations. Souls games have this unique way of stressing out the player by making them make constant, rapid decisions in the face of overwhelming adversity. They can also feel directionless. There's not a constant waypoint leading you to your next objective, and there's no obvious order of operations. Even
Kind of there is though, like, you gotta follow the grace. It's one of the first things you're being told to do. Also, like, since it is open world game, then yeah, it might be not that obvious for everyone.
Your build has so many points of articulation where there's no clear presentation of which stats to level or which items are better than others. Well, that's what so many players love about the series. For anyone who isn't accustomed to the mechanics or willing to put in the time to learn, it can be too much, which in turn gives way to frustration. Modern gaming is pretty notorious for avoiding challenging players for fear of harming sales, which conditions modern gamers to expect things to be accommodating. Elden Ring, despite being part of a series lauded for defying industry trends, had major mainstream hype and drew in players who otherwise would never touch something with "prepare to die" written on the box.
I think this is like giga misconception. And ironically, like, I think this is just Elden Ring is not a part of the series. Elden Ring on its own like works on different principles than Souls games. Like the most important one, being a hard game, is not the main focus of Elden Ring. Elden Ring tries to sell you an idea of the epic journey. It's still from Software's games, therefore it's challenging, but its main focus is not the same. I have feeling like people kind of supposed to stop using this argument. Elden Ring, it's not supposed to be categorized with Dark Souls all this time. It's a spiritual successor mechanically, but it works on different principles. It do not try to be Dark Souls 4. If they would want to make Dark Souls 4, they would call it Dark Souls 4. Like, it's called Elden Ring for a reason. It is different IP for a reason.
As a result, you get Kevins haplessly wandering around and getting themselves killed by very avoidable circumstances. They get irritated when the game isn't what they expected, and they look for the easiest alternative, usually by disengaging as much as possible. Summons, spirit ashes, overpowered ashes of war, the whole nine. Melted cheese on the broccoli of self-improvement. Anything to make the game palatable. They're playing out of curiosity or obligation or just buying into the hype, all while failing to adapt their expectations.
Or because Elden Ring is a great game. Like, you know, you can be pretty bad at the game and still enjoy beating it. I remember when I was a child, I remember when I was a kid, I used to play, I think it was Duke Nukem 3D, and I was getting my ass absolutely fucking blasted. Like, I had like a trouble like beating the levels in that game, and I was continuously just losing, but I still was playing it because I, as a kid, like, just enjoyed the gameplay. I liked the gameplay, so I was playing it. It's really, it's something that there is no point to look for, like, a super, like, a big reason for an individual to play the game. It's not always, or usually even, it's not about some sort of social expectations that you're supposed to beat Elden Ring or whatever. Sometimes it's just simple as that, like, the game just feels good to play, even if you suck at it.
And end up cheating themselves out of a lot of the experience just to avoid learning a hard lesson. It's well established players tend to minimize friction when given the chance. Kevins are merely doing what comes naturally. Only, for Kevins, their willingness to minimize friction is so overwhelming that it consumes any tenacity they might have otherwise developed.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me how today's players just want to avoid friction altogether for some reason. It's as if they will die if they just die in the video game.
I mean, isn't it a typical thing, honestly? It always was the case. It's not common for, like, this day and age. I would say it was always the case. It's people rather prefer to win than to lose. And if you have, like, a perspective of the scrap, then usually it doesn't matter how you are going to achieve the victory, as simple as that.
I don't know, it's funny. So, for the next question, what role do you think Elden Ring's greater accessibility has played in creating Kevins?
Kevins have probably always existed in some way, shape, or form. There's always been players who don't try to learn a game and suffer a hilarious amount of friction for it. The thing is, with Demon's Souls or Dark Souls or Bloodborne, not learning the game was a serious obstacle. I've encountered so many people over the years who got stuck at some point in a Souls game and just could not figure it out. They were ignoring some critical mechanic or misunderstanding the game's logic, and the game was not letting them advance. Not to say every character who gets stuck in a Souls game is a Kevin. Kevins are just those players who get stuck and don't learn anything from it. Where Elden Ring makes its mark is in how it handles Kevin's. Instead of saying you need to kill this boss with what you have or you cannot advance, it gives you a near limitless number of workarounds. For example, the fact that there's no mandatory skill check at the start of the game has always stood out to me as setting Elden Ring apart tonally. The grafted scion is supposed to kill you, full stop. You can kill it, but the reward is menial and the effort unappealing. Add to it all that you only get one try, and I can't imagine most folks going out of their way to test their mettle right out of the gate. And because you advance regardless, the lesson becomes less about overcoming adversity and more about picking your battle. The Tree Sentinel reinforces the same lesson. Fighting it right away is a fool's errand. Best to run past and return when you're ready.
People are like, just keep skipping him, skip him. Why? Why? This is part of the fun of the game.
Even TPS tells his chat to stop buying Kevin's. But chat is right though. Isn't the Sentinel there to just let you know that you don't have to fight them? Like you can just walk around them?
It's overcoming a good challenge. I like this. I'm getting better at it. I'm gonna beat him. It's just a matter of time. Why are you guys yelling to skip the guy? I know I can beat him.
Compare that to something like Dark Souls 3, where you can't continue without beating the first boss.
Yeah. So this is my actual point. Dark Souls games always had some sort of obstacle. Actually, no, when I think about Dark Souls 2 didn't, but that's such a different game. But Dark Souls 1, Demon Souls, and Dark Souls 3 had that boss at the beginning that either like tells you that, dude, you are going to die a lot, or dude, this is a hard game. Like, or like some sort of the boss, like in case of Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3, that's supposed to teach you about somewhat of the foundations of the game, being like that gatekeeper, for the lack of the better word. And Elden Ring doesn't really have that, because Elden Ring operates on different foundations, different idea of what exactly the game is. I really have feeling like both Emotional John and Waifu are obsessed over an idea of Elden Ring being essentially pretty much like Dark Souls, when fundamentally I really don't think it is. Frankly, I would love to see like Dark Souls 4, let's say, with boss mechanics that we know from Elden Ring, because the boss design improved vastly in comparison to Souls games. Like fighting Malenia feels like a dance with all the possibilities that you have, like strafing possibilities and so on. It's just amazing. It feels great. It's a vastly improved experience to the Souls games. But, well, you can, at the same time, you can pretty much cheese practically every single boss in the game, and the more I look at it, the more it seems like ability to cheese bosses in Elden Ring is left there basically on the purpose. I don't know, like maybe at this point maybe my expectations across the years of playing Elden Ring, and after seeing like the direction of the game, especially with the release of the DLC, maybe at this point I just surrendered, and like I have no expectations of any sort in regards of Elden Ring. Maybe it's just a bad design for real, but I don't know, like from my perspective it generally just is different approach to like a design of the game. Like pretty much Elden Ring is not Dark Souls, that's what I'm saying ultimately.
Achievement on Steam for defeating Edict's Gundyr only has like 85% completion. That means around 15% of people who own the game didn't even get past the tutorial. Getting stuck washed out a lot of would-be Kevins in Dark Souls. Elden Ring doesn't let you wash out. There's no point at which it forces you to learn any of its mechanics. If you don't want to learn spacing or how to identify an opening, you don't have to. You can stand behind your boys and stroll your way to victory.
You know, it's funny you mentioned Edict's Gundyr from Dark Souls 3, because I personally know someone who abandoned the game completely after not being able to beat him. And he was very casual about it as well. He didn't really complain or said that Edict's Gundyr should not be there. When I asked him, he just said, "No, you know what? I just could not beat him. I think it's just not for me." I do not know if he would have been a Kevin, but he certainly got filtered by it.
Lula. In the chat, 15% of players quitting before Gander is crazy though. Honestly, it's not that crazy, Goat. Like, a lot of people actually genuinely quit the games after they just buy them. And it's not the case with Elden Ring only, like the hard games itself. It's just, I'm not sure if I can... I cannot probably like show you from the top of my head what game was that, but I remember like it's actually a repetitive theme that certain achievements that technically anyone should get after like 15 minutes of playing usually have completion rate of 90 or 85 or 80%. It is apparently very common that there is a lot of people that turn on the game for a moment and just quit. And that's it. Chloe is just saying, like, here in the background that she does that with some games. Like, I can only think of the case of, for example, someone turning on the game, realizing that, oh, like, it runs pretty poorly for me. They actually try to look around, like, the game settings, realize that, no, it still runs in 10 FPS. And then they just simply quit the game and sometimes never come back to it, even though like they gonna upgrade their PC later on or whatever. It might be the case of that, I don't know, hard to say, but it's actually very common, at least looking at the Steam achievements, that people genuinely just sometimes buy the game and play for less than 15 minutes and that's it, never come back to it again.
So for the next question, will you say Elden Ring has failed Kevin's by enabling them as opposed to previous Souls games?
In a lot of ways, absolutely. The sheer volume of resources at a player's disposal can spoil them, not only for choice, but by ruining their appetite for nuance. Ashes of War and spells are such major sources of damage that often fail to interact with other mechanics in a teachable way.
Well, one could say it's like Elden Ring's actually great because of it, because you have so many ways to approach the gameplay. I already said multiple times, in my opinion, there is like a huge fundamental issue of understanding what Elden Ring is. I absolutely disagree with both of them. Even like the term used here, previous Souls games. I think it's very inaccurate. Let's continue listening.
2 Warriors didn't exist before Elden Ring because there wasn't any way to press a single button and get those huge returns. Spells have gotten faster, gained longer range, and do more damage. The argument can be made that Elden Ring necessitates those things because of how fast enemies are, but it's not hard to see why Kevin's finds spells so appealing. They stay out of harm's way, and more often than not, are handsomely rewarded.
I mean, frankly, dude, let's be honest. This, as stupid as it is, it's kind of fucking epic. If you think about it from the perspective of a scrub, standing there and beaming literally Kamehameha on the opponent is probably the fucking peak of the power fantasy, if you think about it.
Are handsomely rewarded. And summoning is so readily available, there's no good reason to bash your head against a difficult boss when you can just break the AI by adding a second player. In the event that you can't summon a friend, Spirit Ashes get the job done. These things let Kevins ignore fundamental mechanics, and so long as you have them in your arsenal, it might never occur to a Kevin to ever directly engage. It's important to remember that Souls games haven't historically been very intuitive. It takes trial and error to learn what works and what doesn't. But when you can get by with busted options and a little luck, there's no real incentive to understand what you're doing. And Kevins thrive in the obvious and the default. Elden Ring has just decided...
I just realized something. Elon Musk, because this is actually a picture of Elon Musk's build. Elon Musk is a Kevin. He used like different headpiece, but it's Radan said. Just use the different headpiece because, well, for the intelligent scaling. But Gamer ultimately is a Kevin. Wow.
That those obvious defaults are also frequently the best, at least in terms of minimal input, maximum output.
But John, summoning has been around since the beginning of Souls games. What changed to make it so universal among Kevins?
While summoning has always been available, it's never been easier. Passwords came in with Bloodborne and really took off with Dark Souls 3. Before that,
Bloodborne introduced passwords? Right, it did, yeah.
You had to understand the invisible matchmaking formula, which ruled out Kevin's wholesale. But Elden Ring took it a step further by removing the item requirement. You technically need a fur-calling finger remedy, but beyond needing to be crafted, they serve as a meaningless extra step. Not needing some precious resource like humanity or embers to enable summoning means there's nothing to balance. You just summon at every available opportunity, completely risk-free. If you die, you just do it again. The summoning pools and Stakes of Marika are also doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Not only can you be escorted through the entire level, but whenever you die to a boss, you can respawn right outside and resummon. The desire to remove as much friction as possible has made summoning ubiquitous, in turn making the most efficient way to play being escorted. Suddenly, single player is almost a challenge mode, and anyone not actively seeking one out defaults to co-op. So it's no wonder Kevins and their chariots are so abundant. The summoning system was practically tailor-made to their specifications.
Yeah, summoning is pretty much everywhere, and it's also all you encounter in PvP. And speaking of PvP, Kevins tend to have a strong aversion to it. Has that been your experience?
I've never met a Kevin in PvP that I didn't pity. I know a lot of invaders won't attack them and instead try to give them some items or lead them through a level. I know because I've been that invader, but when we're highlighting that Elden Ring being too permissive with players is letting them stay Kevins forever, invading feels like the right counterbalance.
Jesus Christ. The guy died.
Letting them stay
Okay,
Kevins forever.
What? Bro got one-shotted with hand axe. Wow, this is crazy.
The right counterbalance. And it's probably enigmatic of the average Kevin's aversion to PvP that the only counter to cooperation is invasion. I don't think it's exclusive to Kevin's, but if I had a subscriber for every person who told me they were just trying to play the game and how much they hate invaders for ruining that experience, I'd have a much larger channel. Invading has always been and will always be a controversial mechanic. Guy comes out of nowhere and stabs you in the ass. Why you? Why now? To a Kevin, those questions don't have answers. Like everything in the game, it's just another thing that happens, and the fact that another player has any say in the matter makes them the bad guy. And invasions hit players the hardest who aren't willing to adapt. It's the ultimate version of an unexpected challenge, and if all you're willing
330 milliseconds, dude. Holy shit. What's a difference between living in Argentina and on the moon? Because looking at the ping, the average ping, there is not much of the difference.
I know.
Hmm?
When you live on the moon, you jump higher. But when you live in Argentina, you have better weather.
Thank
See?
you.
I know.
Thank you, darling, for your input.
Willing to do is press the same button over and over, you're gonna be taught a lesson. The toughest thing for me is that I don't know how to reach them. PvP is something you have to apply yourself to, and if you're essentially on autopilot, it's never going to click. Which I find truly tragic. Invasions are the most unique mechanic in this series, and to know that a growing portion of the player base has zero interest in them is heartbreaking.
Honestly, yeah, this is normal. This is normal that PvP, I mentioned it earlier, PvP always going to have the least interest. It's absolutely typical thing. And I am kind of surprised, like, it's surprising to them. It's surprising to Emotional John for one. It's completely normal. As for the PvP in Souls games, and the fact like it is actually not excluded from your PvE experience, and you are being affected as a PvE player with the PvP shenanigans, I think honestly from my perspective it's pretty great. Because it's not even about like just the fact like, you know, you have these PvP interactions, but more like implementation of the invasions in such way like they are implemented in this game. It basically makes a random event. Instead of, I don't know, a dragon flying at you from the sky in Skyrim, which essentially is a random event, you have an invader, that's another player, that's affecting your journey through the lands between. And I think this is amazing, because there is no better randomized experience than the one you share with other players. Because another player is always going to make actually just endless possibilities for things that might potentially happen.
I couldn't care less if someone wants to cheese a boss or get carried through the whole game for the sake of expediency, but I'll be damned before I stop caring about someone's ability to participate in the greatest of Souls traditions.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it's a shame that people do not see the wonders of invasions and what PvP can actually bring to the table, instead of just, play the PvE until you get bored of it and do nothing else. And I think people should give it a try. It's not the end of the world if you lose.
It's not the end of the world.
And for the final question, do you see Kevins as a passing phenomenon, or do you see them as the future of the series?
There's a common sentiment that From Software has abandoned their roots and essentially sold out to appeal to a casual audience. With Elden Ring as attractive to Kevins as it is, it's a hard sentiment to ignore, and it can be even harder to accept because the things that appeal to Kevins are the same things that frustrate veterans. It seems almost inevitable that one group will give way to the other, and Elden Ring was a big step in Kevin's favor. But I'd like to think there's room in the space for both types of players. Elden Ring is really aiming for that middle ground between a hardcore, punishing experience and something that even the least competent players can get through, and I think that's a noble goal. It shows FromSoft doesn't want to ruin what they've built and maintain a sincere interest in growing both their audience and design philosophy. It might not always be in a direction everyone likes, but such is the nature of compromise. But they should proceed with caution. A game for everyone is a game for no one, after all. If they can't nail down a target audience, the integrity of the series could be at serious risk. And of course, I'd like to see the Kevins of today become the veterans of tomorrow, though that feels extremely unlikely. For that to happen, whatever balance future games strive for needs to be focused on encouraging players to engage with as many of the mechanics as possible, instead of just giving them a choose-your-own-difficulty adventure. Multiplayer existing as a purely optional aspect may well be the source of all Kevins. If the game could manage to make co-op a sidestep instead of an easy mode, there'd be no way for them to stay Kevins. PvP with proper incentives and facilitation could easily turn a terrifying outlier into the game mode of the century. If Fortnite can appeal to anyone aged 5 to 100, there's no reason to think Souls PvP couldn't be for everyone, Kevins included. Because Kevins are simply products of their environments. Whatever experience FromSoft wants to prioritize is going to determine that outcome. I'd like to see them hold their players to a higher standard while embracing as many playstyles as possible. There's a fine line between accessibility and enabling. FromSoft just needs to find it.
Just to be clear and to remind everyone one more time, anyone can play their game however they want, and Kevins can make out of their experience whatever they see fit. It's of no business to us if they decide to cheese the game or summon or do whatever the fuck they want. This was just a fun video talking about those silly gamers that we sometimes laugh at and realize where they come from and why they are here. No malice is intended towards them.
It's only a game.
Let's just keep that clear, okay?
Pretty wholesome ending. That being said, yeah, it's some takes in this video are, in my opinion, let's say that I just don't agree with many things said in there, and I think like the perspective presented is sometimes kind of freaking weird. But well, overall, good watch nonetheless, and furthermore, it seems like this video actually doing hella freaking well, like views-wise, and just like it brings the discussion. So I guess like Wi-Fi did a decent job as a content creator, since yeah, this thing is doing views and the nice ones on top of everything.